My guest today is a comedian and storyteller from Seattle. He hosts a reoccurring show at Annex Theater titled Weird and Awesome.
Actually, I don't anymore.
Oh, you don't?
No. I mean, it's on hiatus, just like kind of everything is.
He used to host a recurring show at Annex Theater called Weird and Awesome with Emmett Montgomery and participated in season 9 of Last Comic Standing. A Seattle comedy legend. I'm excited to welcome Emmett Montgomery. Thanks for coming on, buddy.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
I think
man.
that's a good start.
I need to do my research on you a little bit before, and your bio was very copy and pasteable. So
yeah, and it's totally like outdated, you know.
Yeah, some of the stuff you're still doing, like Zoom for the grotto.
So I'm doing the Magic Hat, which was my experimental kind of show and tell participatory comedy show. It was described by the Seattle Times as more of a cult than a comedy show, and that works.
Okay.
But I think comedy shows in church came from the same place. That's the sort of high level bullshit we're going to be talking about, the pretentious stuff. But yeah, so I moved that to Zoom, and I still do it, and it is it's not in the basement of the grotto anymore. It's in the basement of our hearts, right? The basement of the internet, if you will. And it's been very exciting how kind of weirdly accessible and the things people can do, because people will put their names in the hat if they have something to share for 5 minutes. And like a couple months ago, somebody attached a camera to their Roomba, and we just did a tour of the house for 5 minutes.
Okay.
And a minute of that was with anticipation, seeing if it was going to fall off the stairs.
Yeah.
And, and that's not something that you could have like pre-plague, right? Before the plague, I was producing 7 shows a month. I had 2 weeklies. I had my more stand-up-y show I did with Brett Hamill called Joke Tellers Union, that, we'd have 100 people coming every week, and it was at the clock out. It was super fun, and it felt good.
That was up on Beacon Hill?
In Beacon Hill.
Yeah.
And, as slowly we developed a community, and we hope to bring that back very soon. And then I had every Monday, I had the Magic Hat, which was down some stairs, and there'd be weird songs and claps and rituals. And it was also a really good place, an incubator for people, not just comedians, but for storytellers or just
community
people. Yeah, there's this weird kind of rich guy. I don't even want to say his name, that would come up and do these. They're not even magic tricks. Like once he asked if there were any like trained medical professionals in the audience. This woman who's a nurse comes up, and he's like, okay, I'm going to stop my heart so you can't feel my pulse. And she had him like take his pulse, and then it went away.
What the hell?
Yeah. And so providing a space for that was kind of cool, right? My co-producer, Erin, she'd do this thing because she lived in Japan. She would call the Tokyo Dominoes and prank it. And like, that's what, we would do sometimes in that show. And that was the space for it on like, what is comedy? But then I did have Weird and Awesome with Emmett Montgomery, which is a show that I did 11 years with some pretty amazing people. And we'll come back one way or the other. It's maybe even just as a video archive, because we recorded 8 years of it. And
yeah, I got some questions for you on that.
Okay.
But before we dive into stuff though, I just, if you are checking us out on the internet right now, hit that like or subscribe button on YouTube and hit the notifications bell. Doing so helps us with the algorithm on YouTube, so new people can come across our content, especially fans of yours already. But let's talk about you a little bit. I met you, I don't know, a month ago now.
Yeah, I had. It was kind of my first time out a little bit.
I had always heard like your name. I knew of you. I had a couple people that have like moved on to New York and other places bring you up. Like, oh, I did this with Emmett, like Andy Haynes, like he'd done Laugh Hole with you, I think.
Oh yeah, I actually had the honor of giving Andy his first 8-minute set.
Yeah.
Because he lived in Bellingham and he would drive an hour and a half to do like 5 minutes at the open mic at the Underground, and people were like, "What is this?" Because it was angry and strange, but there was something really beautiful there. And so when the other guys I was producing with, I'm like, we need to give Andy a long set, when 8 minutes was long, and because there just wasn't a lot of time outside of the comedy clubs. And they were like, "Your funeral," and it was. Sometimes there's just a beautiful chunk of comedy where everything is where it should be. And that's what Andy did. And then it was kind of a preview of things to become. Now, am I responsible for him? No, because he would have done.
I think it's fair to say at this point you are.
He would
his entire career,
his failures,
comes back
his
to
divorce, everything. No, but because he would have done that somewhere else. But to be able to be that place. And I think it makes you a better comedian, too, to be able to participate and facilitate that. Because when you see those eureka moments, you can think about, why do I enjoy this? It's not like I want to do something like that, but like, oh, okay, so that's achievable. And what was beautiful about it? And what is beautiful that I can find in what I do?
It's funny you say that, though, because there's this kid, he's probably going to listen to this or watch this on YouTube. I know he's going to hit that like button or subscribe, but his name's Damon, and he is up in Bellingham, and he started coming down to do sets in Seattle, but he's in school and that shit. Yeah. And he reached out to me. He was like, "Hey, I'm trying to do this, but like there's only so much stage time I can get." And I thought of Andy, him talking about going down into the scene, like the kid's in the same position as him. Yeah. And there's a limitation on what you can do, but I told him, I was like, dude, there's nothing stopping you from starting an open mic up there. Yeah. Starting, like, it's comedy's like AA. Anybody can start doing it.
I kind of describe it as sort of reverse AA, because it's a bunch of people who are like pushing each other into the abyss.
Like
each step is further into a hole. It's
very true. Yeah,
but there are general kind of certain feelings and steps and everything, and it is kind of like, you find this thing. There's these things inside of you that you need to get out, or you want to learn how to do. And for me, it's always been like, seek out and see if there's a space that is doing what I want to do. If there's not, see how I can maybe support so somebody else does it, Mm-hmm. And if it's not happening, then do it myself, right? And then, each has its own kind of consequences.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I have not asked you about your beard. And like, I don't know how I haven't even brought that. And I, like, anybody watching, there's no way that they've gotten this far without like being like, that's a, big beard. What is the story behind the beard? Or is that what you wanted to talk about during the story time?
No,
section?
let's totally do it. This is going to be a really meandering conversation.
I got my blueprint, so we'll be all. I got a map over here, but I
think this is great. There's nothing better than a conversation that starts with me correcting you in your first sentence.
Oh yeah,
so there you go. So the beard. So I grew up Mormon. I grew up in Orem, Utah, which is actually a town with the most Mormons per capita in the world, right? It's right. If you did a map of religions, in Utah, and Mormonism was like a purple dot, right? Or the color purple, the darkest purple would be in Orem, Provo, where I'm from. And it was more of like a culture than, a religion, a choice. You just were born into it. And so there was definitely, I always shaved. You always wanted to be clean cut. Now, I went through some weird hair stuff and everything. And my dad, too, taught at BYU that had a no beards policy that came from the student revolutions of the 60s and 70s. That was a way. But my dad also had a beard because he had a beard permit. for various reasons.
Was your dad Mormon?
Oh yeah,
The
I
whole
grew up
family.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, my dad taught at Brigham Young University, the religious university.
Do you have to be Mormon to teach there?
Technically no, but I mean,
yeah.
And there are non-Mormon students, but it is definitely kind of an unofficial. Well, it is a part of church culture in the church, and it's
weird. Like, there's up north, like there's definitely a Mormon presence, and I've had a few people in corporate environments bring that up, and it's like, in like interviewing situations, like that's against the law to even ask about someone's religion. Yes. Like it'd be like asking, I don't know, your sexuality or any of that shit. And it's such a like cunning thing too, because like it's such a casual thing, but it's such a loaded question.
There is a code of conduct that students and faculty are expected to adhere to, and that's how they get away from it, around it, right?
Okay, so the code of conduct is
you're choosing to do it and follow these things. And then there was a thing called BYU approved housing, so it was hard to get like an apartment that was BYU approved housing. The landlord agreement was this code of conduct too, and so like if say your landlord saw you smoking, but even off the property, they could challenge your lease, right? And so
damn.
Yeah. And and then of course the response to that is rebellion, right? And so in Utah, there's a dichotomy of cultures. There's the Mormons and not Mormons. And then it's kind of hard to like just be a casual middle. I think it's slowly becoming that way, but it's real complicated, especially now with everything going on.
How old were you when you had your first doubts?
I was 16.
So you made it all the way to 16 without...
Well, I mean, when I felt that I could even... I mean, they were kind of there for a while, but like where I could like actively start feeling it. And a lot of that, so... in Mormonism, there's something called, it's a lay clergy, right? So it is the civilians essentially get recruited, right? And there's technically no paid positions and stuff like that. And so we all have, the priesthood is as young Mormons, we get, that gets unlocked through rituals and stuff.
Just
and
any statement that starts with young man, it's like, it has such weird vibes to begin with.
But when
young boys,
when you're 12 years old, you can start participating in the rituals, handing out the sacrament. At 16, you start blessing the sacrament. When you're 16, one of the things as you give the prayers, to that bread and water and everything, one of the things that you do is they had something they called shut-in sacraments, where you deliver the sacrament to the members of your ward, of your congregation that couldn't leave the house, right? And that was something you had to do like at least once a month, and everybody hated to do it. But on my first day, after my 16th birthday, they sent me to the house nobody wanted to go to. This woman named Elizabeth Dowdle, who was old, like ancient, and she had this house full of chestnuts with the spiky outer things. Have you ever seen a chestnut tree? So they have this spiky kind of rind around them, and they're really heavy. And like these things, the house was when we were kids, we'd ride our dirt bikes really faster into the tree because sometimes it'd fall and hit you and it hurt, right? And so it was always kind of
like a haunted.
It was a spooky house, and
it sounds like something out of like a horror movie, like out of It.
Yeah, there was definitely like just this spooky house, and apparently she had a dog named Honey that didn't like anybody, and was this just ancient Boston Terrier, right? They're like, the dog is mean and stinky, and but so I went over there, and she was lovely, and we talked, and she
That was not what I thought you were going to say at all. What?
And she but part of it too, I mean, but she wanted to know, and I mean, part of it could be maybe because my relationship with my mother went through some times where she'd be bedridden. She was addicted to painkillers and had migraines and had things. And so I kind of knew how to communicate with somebody who was maybe not at their best.
Yeah.
But she wanted to know what had happened at church. And I think part of it too is you have these young dudes who are thrust into it and just don't know necessarily how to talk to somebody who was not maybe in the best ideal situation. And that dog loved me. That dog would sit in my lap while I was doing the sacrament, right? Or, well, I'd be on my knees, but was by me. And I think it was just whatever the dynamic was. So I started going over there every week.
Mm-hmm.
And I would bring her the program from the church. And occasionally we'd sing a little hymn. And then I realized, too, that normally she was on oxygen, but she would take her oxygen off for some dignity to be around, right? So she'd get tired. But and I saw how her faith was keeping her alive. And she would tell stories like, I mean, she had been in that town her whole life. And so she remembered when it didn't have street lights, when it didn't have pavement, when it was just gravel roads, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the town had grown up around her, and she was just.
And as a young kid, this is like the only thing you know, so it's like fascinating to hear about the roads.
Well, it's still fascinating, to think about, just that, and also just, I just felt like I was getting secrets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I really saw how her faith was keeping her kind of alive, and it was pure and beautiful. And then I would see and she was an outsider, and then I would see, people could walk around and interact, and how hypocritical they were, and how they were like Sunday only Mormons, right? And supposedly like the good, proper, upstanding kids were, how they would act, and these adults that would torment, that were just unkind to the weirdos. And they just seemed, this was the most Christ-like person I had met at that point. And I thought about it, and I saw how her faith was keeping her alive, and how I was not feeling what she was feeling at all. And it felt maybe like for me to find something like that, it was not where I was. And so I was like, I'm going to be a good Mormon for her. And then when she died, and nobody really went to her funeral and everything, and after she passed away, when I was like 17, and I had been really lazy about doing the steps that you would have to do to go to your mission, and so there was a hesitancy in me, and I'd really have to scramble and do some things. Her funeral's on a Saturday, and that Sunday after that, I just was like, I was 18 at the time, and I was slacking, but I'm like, I'm not going to church anymore. And it did create a rift in my family.
Yeah,
and everything.
I have to imagine, like, that must be on par with somebody like coming out, where it's like to a super conservative family.
There is some of that. Like you would get shunned for that. And I think it was really, I mean, you're
literally like, you're shifting your whole lifestyle.
Yeah.
And publicly shifting it and privately shifting it. And how soon did you go to Seattle after that?
I moved to Seattle when I was 22.
Okay, so there were 4 years. And before we move on from Utah, can you, like, I've heard some, like, docking or, like, different, like, do you have any inside funny Mormon stuff that, like...
I actually have a story. Okay. Because I think I know what you're talking about. You're talking about I mean, Mormons are, especially growing up Mormon, you're part of that involves being a teenager, and part of that involves being incredibly horny.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just how it works, right? And then, but how people, like, I read some statistic that a majority of people, when they see caution wet paint or do not touch wet paint sign, they'll touch that paint just to test, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that forbidden, right?
Oh yeah.
And so then imagine that with boobs,
yeah.
or whatever, but or just even, and so there's like, there's two things that Mormon teenagers are good at, and that's dry humping. So, that is just the way. So you have like the Levi Lovin and all of that, just like trying to do everything upright to the book. And so there is stuff, I think you were talking about soaking.
That's right.
Because the term docking, which I think
very
is a very
different-
beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Which is when
thing.
two men connect foreskins.
Yes.
It's kind of like penis kissing,
Isn't it like Chinese finger cuffs a little bit? Like
a little bit.
There's a risk
but it
involved.
seems something really beautiful, and it's also something that like no Mormons will ever do, because we are all circumcised.
Yeah. That's
so when you're born
do.
into it, so
They're excluded from.
Yeah, excluded from.
by
then
volition.
But then there is soaking, which is kind of just the tip, not moving, and there's all sorts of stuff. There is.
Well, I've heard about soak parties. This was
okay.
Where you I'm just making sure I don't step on anybody's material, because it was in their act. But when one person is stationed inside of the other person, there's no movement.
Yeah.
But if a third party can create involuntary,
like shake the bed.
I mean, whatever action they choose to take, like that would be a soaking party.
I was never part of soaking.
Okay.
I'm
sorry. I know that probably.
No. No, I mean, but there are some practices that. Another thing too is I think the term came out as saddlebacking. That's not Mormon, but the whole anal doesn't count and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the problem when you have these kids trying to do sex workarounds without any sex education, like butt stuff is not like an amateur move, right? There's a lot of things you have to do, and ways for these kids to kind of hurt each other and get weird associations with sex. And that's, I think, a lot of like problem and repression, and in let alone even like you're not even supposed to be heterosexual. So what if you're like homosexual?
Oh yeah.
Right. And there's real distorted views of gender already. And so what if you can't have your truth? And I was fortunate to find a group of really wonderful misfits. And I was kind of the boring, weird kid who drew. I had a speech impediment growing up, so words were really hard for me, which is maybe why I do words for a living now, because I had to earn it. I didn't even start drinking until I was 19. Yeah. So I had left. I had left the church, and I mean, I didn't leave the church because I wanted to drink and fuck or any of that. I left the church because I wanted to find kind of a truth, But
so that truth led you to Seattle in what, 2003?
Actually 2001.
Okay. So we were talking about this. So you've been in Seattle comedy for 20 years.
2004 was when I started.
Okay.
So
I think anything over 15 probably qualifies a legend. Or else I'm gonna have to edit the whole start of this episode.
Are you a legend or are you like a jobber?
One of the two.
To do wrestling. I've been around for a long, and my mind was like, okay, I've been doing it for 15 years, but just like my mom was 40 for the last 2 decades of her life, you know, like she slowly, the number slowly went up. I think when she died, at 69, she was telling people she was almost 50. So, you know.
I told you he's a good dog, by the way. He crept up here.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I don't know if he's in frame right now, but we got a guest today.
But as for why I have a beard, all right. So it was clean cut, and I would shave, and I would go for that. And I had my heart broken when I moved to Seattle. And I was like, you know what? All I want to do is, you know, I said out loud, just trying to deal with this like heartbreak. It's like, I want to grow a handlebar mustache and get a motorcycle with a sidecar. You know, for a chimpanzee to hang out in, and just travel the country and find out what love is. And I only did the first part. And it was kind of an electric fence around my heart, you know, this mustache. But it became really fun. And I had been kind of doing stand-up at that point, too. I had been. So maybe it was 2005 I had that mustache.
What drew you to stand-up? Because I can't... Were you a fan growing up?
Well, we had these... we had Steve Martin records that we'd play a lot. And... you know, I was fascinated by like the weirdness of the Gallagher specials, you know, which connects for like a young kid. But then, you know,
have you ever seen his or listened to his interview on Marin?
So I was at the Bridgetown that he was at.
Okay.
And I think that was before the Bridgetown Comedy Festival. That was before the Marin interview.
Yeah.
But I think around the time, and he showed up. And he was wearing a denim vest with an airbrush portrait of his face on the back, right? That said like Gallagher. Like if you had like a van, you know, a decked out van, like that sort of like, and you were like, give me a Gallagher thing. And there was like wings and sledgehammer. It was just awesome. But I saw him, he went to and he was just really trying to get stuff from being Gallagher, you know, free drinks and food and sex and all that, cred, respect. But some tried to go into a venue that was part of a bar that was part of the comedy festival, Bridgetown Comedy Festival in Portland. And he's like, okay, I need to see your ID. And he's like, I don't need ID. I'm Gallagher, inventor of the comedy special. Like, that's what he said. He's like, well, I need to see ID. And then he turns around because that's where the picture of him is on his vest. And does like, takes his 2 thumbs and it's like, it's me, Gallagher. Right? And it's like, yeah, I know who you are. I'm just legally required to see your ID. Like everybody has to have ID to be in here. And he was like, fuck you, man. I'm Gallagher, the inventor of the comedy special. And
Did he actually invent the comedy special?
He says he had the first
totally
hour.
Believable.
I mean, it could be. I mean, he might have done the first, but I never viewed those as comedy specials as kids. We're like, this is the guy, the sledgehammer guy, or the guy with the giant couch. You remember that?
He had a lot of stuff.
And it was kind of cool, you know, and I think that sort of led a foundation. But you do look at a lot of the foundational comics, or even just artists are kind of terrible people, right? And you know he but in you know, kind of like funny weird stuff. But as the thought, I mean, it's somebody with a speech impediment. Like I would try out for plays and not being able to make it through the audition, and I'd end up building the set, you know, and kind of stuff like that.
So you were like, Gallagher's angle is what I need to do. No. If I can't speak, I need to smash stuff.
No. Well, I did turn to the hammer for a second, but but it really, and I was always kind of drawing and doing stuff and sort of visual artist. I did get into spoken word. There was this fantastic poet that was the father of a real good friend of mine, a guy named Alex Caldiero. He's from Sicily, and he's kind of a weird mystic, and he's like an acoustic Reggie Watts, like the stuff he would do. And he really kind of took me under his wing, and my father was always present. He was a linguist and an academic, and a lot of his energy went to my mom, and so it's kind of like a wild kid, but he really helped me kind of figure out my relationship to words. And so I was a little bit of a slam poetry star in Seattle, like, you know, in Salt Lake and stuff. But a lot of my poems were really like funny. I realized like maybe I was doing like poems with punchlines, right? And I didn't really necessarily know that at the time. And by the time I got to Seattle, I looked for the poetry scene, and the poetry scene was so different. In smaller environments, creative communities, especially in a place where doing art that could be potentially subversive is something that is challenged. You kind of have to swim upstream, and you have to really want to do it. If the creative scene is comfortable, there's some great things about it. If it's safe and welcoming, you get a lot of people who wouldn't do it if there were challenges, and you have a lot, and there can be some stuff about it. Then you also various cliques will form and all of that if it's like expansive. In Salt Lake, it was like if you wanted to do poetry or anything really, you had to really want to do it, and everybody was kind of different because they had their own journey. So the age range and the politics and ethics of the poetry scene was huge and sprawling. And here it seemed kind of like very goth swingers. It was kind of like LA that did not want to necessarily, people would be like, oh, it's a kid from Utah. And a lot of people would make assumptions about me. One, that I was kind of sort of naive and uneducated and conservative, where I really wasn't any of those things, right? And in fact, you know, like I was very, you know, I'd lived a lot of life, you know, and
How old were you at the time?
I was 22.
Okay, so I don't know. It's 22 because I'm Quinn Fitzgerald. I produce with him, and he's 22, and I feel like he's a pretty young 22. Like he hasn't ventured out too much, but like there's a much different path people can get to that point. And
I was because I was also came from a sheltered place, and I was definitely
and pushing that away,
figuring shit out and experiencing a lot of stuff for the first time. But as far as like people be like, this is alcohol, and it's like, oh, I know. yeah, I am, you know.
So did you go up at Underground to start stand up? Or where'd you go up first?
Well, so when I moved here, poetry just didn't connect. And then, you know, I had to kind of find myself, and started working. I had been working at video stores in Utah, and I continued that here, and kind of really sort of was an audience member and exploring the niches. There was a really exciting drag scene at the time, kind of shock drag, punk rock drag scene. And there were some amazing shows. There was a show called Faux Bang that was kind of this grand guignol. They would kill Kenny G a lot. Somebody dressed as Kenny G. It was just this bizarre thing, like great drag performances. And then like a punk rock band, a rock band would close it out. Like I saw The Gossip for the first time at a Rebar as part of this drag rock show. And then we dancing, and you know, there were just kind of weird fringe communities, all these beautiful caves to kind of explore and be part of. At that point, I was making puppets, these paper bag puppets. And so I would sell them at Art Walk and figuring out kind of who I want. And then I became a manager of the Hollywood video of the store, and, you know, and was in a committed relationship, and a lot of the creative stuff kind of went away, and sort of finding myself and my coffee guy, this guy who had a coffee cart that I would go to at 7 a.m. before I walked 2 miles to my job. And he and I had talked, and he's like, "Hey, you're funny." And one of the things I did is I hosted a cult classic movie night for a while at a cafe, because, you know, I had access to free movies, and that was real fun. But he's like, "Have you ever thought about stand up?" And people who I like went to high school and stuff say like, "Oh, you always wanted to be a comedian," and I don't remember that at all. Like at all. Because the idea like terrifies me, but it terrified me at the time. It still does. But he was like, "You should come to this open mic with me because it sucks so bad, and I need somebody to come with me." And so I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'll come to the next one after I get off work." And so I walked down to the Underground, and that's where I met Ron Reed for the first time. He was the manager of the Underground and later became my manager for a while. He's a wonderful person.
I've seen him in a movie. Yeah. He was in a road comedy movie, wasn't he?
The Montana Run.
I think so. Yeah, I watched a clip of it.
Yeah, that's him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, yeah, but he
I got a weird thing for like Pacific Northwest comedy stuff. Like I am just into the history of it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. There's some real beautiful stuff. But so I went, and the coffee guy had chickened out and wasn't there. So I just sat in the back. I didn't know anybody. And I watched 10. And this is how small the open mic was. There were 10 people there.
To sign up?
They were all doing 5 to 7, right? Then that was
was anybody like?
I mean, like Jeff Lott or Dwayne Goad might have been there. But a lot of people you wouldn't know. There was, though, this woman went and told, and a lot of the jokes like seemed like not good, right? And you could see like, and it felt I was like, "Oh wow, I can see why this sucks." But then this woman went up and she started talking about how these crows, the crows in her neighborhood, were trying to kill her. And it was like really funny and strange. And I might have been the only one laughing. And that was a woman named Rosalie. Rosalie Gayle, who she and her husband Doug, did stand up as well. In fact, I really liked what they were doing, and they kind of became in my friend circle. And they got secretly married. Like nobody knew they were even dating. And then one day Rosalie showed up at the open mic and signed a different last name. And they're like, "Yeah, we got married."
That's funny.
But they own these pretty amazing craft stores here in Seattle, Ugly Baby and Monster. And they have a really successful kind of creative empire. She was one of the original queens of Etsy. Right?
Oh, wow.
And so she channeled, and a big part of what they do is she sells like fart jokes and stuff in these like shower art funny things. Like she's become a comedian in a very different way. Yeah. In that she can pay her bills doing it. But saying that, really what I took away from that open mic was this is something that I can fail at. Right. And that also, because everybody sucked so bad, there was no standard of like, you have to be successful at this. And, you know, it wasn't like sports or any of the things I was awful at. When it didn't even seem like there was a way to win, honestly. I think
what was the audience like? Like how many people were in the audience?
I don't know. They were all just shadows. And
was it, I mean, more than 10 though, or was
maybe?
Yeah, because the Underground, when it was light in that room, it felt really light.
Well, this was even a different venue.
Oh,
this was like a weird weird basement under a bar called oh man, I can't even remember. I want to say George wasn't named after a famous baseball player. And it was one of the divest bars in Pioneer Square. It was beautiful. That's where like the bad cops would go to get drunk on duty.
Yeah.
It was awesome. I saw one of my favorite fist fights there. But and we'd all go up, and it was like crumbly and beautiful, and also people were smoking there, so it was like smoke filled, like your typical like.
So what happens next? So is there a
I went
scene
next
for
week.
you to go? Was it just once a week though, in terms of mics? Or
well, for me, it was because I was working a job, right? And so, but for me, it was those 7 minutes was a way for me to kind of forget the fact that like I was a weird video nerd, movie nerd that had somehow stumbled into a grown-up job that was totally underqualified for, working for a kind of soulless corporation, and just like I was going nuts.
Yeah. Being a movie nerd's not that bad though.
Oh.
Like I respect it. Like
but that's like, hey, you're really good at recommending movies to people, and you love watching movies, and it's like, have you ever thought about payroll? Like that's not the way to do it.
Oh yeah.
But for me it was this. But a bunch of us, we would all go together and write together, and became kind of, and there was sort of the cool kids and but we became sort of a more sort of inclusive group. But you really didn't have a lot of options. You could do the mic on Sundays and Mondays at the Underground. There was at the Tacoma Underground, I think there was a Wednesday, right? And then there were one or two kind of booked shows, but it was hard to get in there. And the Comedy Underground did have like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They kind of had niche shows. And at one point, Carl Warmenhoven, who was the assistant manager, who's amazing, he would be like, hey, you should come to this, or he would refer you to the producer. But then you would go and watch what was happening on the Underground during the weekend. And if you were there enough, like maybe the host wouldn't show up, or maybe they needed like 5 minutes, and slowly there was actually kind of a ladder to getting to feature. And that was what you want. But, you find this thing you love and it's not enough. And so we started producing shows outside, and a lot of people kind of objected to that because they felt we had skipped some steps, right? We were being disrespectful. The other comedy club, Giggles, at the time, Tirey thought that because we were doing shows that people were going to on days the club wasn't even open, that we were stealing from him. Where in the Underground, and Ron and Carl saw that we were bringing new audience members to comedy, and if they came to our shows, they would maybe follow us to the Underground. So
where were you putting on the shows?
Mainly Capitol Hill and places like that. And so we did Capitol Hill Art Center, which was on 12th. They had a smaller stage, and the coffee guy who had got me into things, he who would push me into going to an open mic, his coffee stand was right from it. And so one of the producers there is like, oh, we just lost 4 weeks of programming. It's like, we'll do a comedy show. And it just worked out. It was like the day after my birthday, and the day before another guy we were doing comedy. I was doing comedy with a guy named Daniel Carroll. And so we got a bunch of people that came out, and it was just kind of perfect. Like, so that first month of shows, which Andy was on one of those, just was cool and weird. And because we kind of didn't know the rules or were breaking the rules, I think a lot of things that people thought were really hack or stereotypical about comedy were unappealing, or people that would never go to comedy shows because of the stigma at the time. This was stand-up comedy was the uncoolest thing to do in 2004 in Seattle. This was an improv town. If you said comedy, they were like, oh, like improv.
Well, that was, what was the show that Seattle had temporarily that was, man, I'm blanking on it.
Are you talking about Almost Live?
Yeah. When was that? What year was that? Like,
I don't know if it was still going by the time, but you know, you'd see all the, but that kind of, even those sort of peaks had gone. Like there used to be like 5 comedy clubs in Seattle.
well, at the time too, comedy was in a dip.
It was in a dip nationwide.
Yeah. And it was before the boom of the internet for comedy and podcasting
and alt comedy coming and a lot of different, and so
I've seen like a lineup from the Comedy Store of like 2003, and I've heard people talking about like how bad, like nobody was going there, it was a ghost town, all this shit, and you look at it and it's like literally 10 people that all are in like the top 25 most known comics, and nobody was going to see them. It's pretty wild.
There's a freedom of exploring a ghost town, or being, you know, part of last call, you know, when you're like, there's a weird desperation and a place to grow. And so I think we just hit like kind of a perfect moment. And then those things kind of became, and then as we grew, and we're kind of this group of 4 guys. And then later on, Peter Gray, who just retired, is the booker for the Seattle International Comedy Competition. He'd be a really interesting guy to talk to. He assembled kind of like a group, and we would do this weekly show in Queen Anne called Comedy Night. And it was a fake TV show that all of us would kind of be on. And there were guys like regular cast members were Brian Moot, Hari Kondabolu, Drew Barth was our host for a long time. And then me and, you know, the four prop guys. So Kevin, and then Scott Moran, who's become a very successful director. He directed Rory Scovel's specials.
Oh, wow.
And kind of found his niche in that. Like he had a really good, still has like a pretty amazing production mind. And then Dan and all of us would do these, and doing comedy every week. And it really kind of started to form, and there was sort of a moment, and we were banned from Giggles. The Stranger wrote an article about us based on this thing that we did, where Kathy Sorbo had such a bad experience headlining Giggles, a local comic who was just amazing and raunchy and weird and kind of, she's so great. But she had such a bad time at Giggles, and there was dispute over money that there was a bar called the Monkey Pub. I mean, it's still there, because Laughs is where Giggles was. That she booked a comedy show there at the place she did karaoke, and had the 4 of us who were banned from Giggles open for her as a huge like fuck you. And the show was,
Drew was talking about the Sharks and the Jets a little bit between Giggles and underground comedy. I didn't realize I was walking into this one. This is
well, I mean, so how I saw it was the underground was like, anybody can come, right? We don't care where you're doing stand up. But Tirey at Giggles was like, I care where you're doing stand up. You have to have loyalty to me. And Giggles was booking the better comedians. Like that's where Marin would go. That was like, you had a chance to work with Jim Gaffigan. And I think there was also like a very aggressive prove yourself thing, right? And there can be a lot of, so people got their muscles in a different way than us, who kind of had to find our own journey and took the more, you know, it's like poetry versus math was kind of going on. But this,
there's merit to both of those things. As somebody that like, you and I went out a couple weeks ago, and we did like 3 sets in one night, and did it in kind of every type of room that's available around here. And I go to Tacoma, I go to Nate's Club, and like people that are in this scene that aren't going to Nate's Club to work out and be in front of those types of audiences, I don't understand. Like, I mean,
I think you can't just do one thing. Now, and that could even be like, people, like I made a decision because the Seattle I came to was all this place of kind of wonderful caves and interesting communities and weird scenes that was kind of disconnected. I was fortunate enough to be this weird loner wanderer to be able to like wander into those and develop relationships and be kind of maybe not completely part of it, but be kind of welcome in those scenes. I kind of feel that same way because like, I do storytelling and stand up and these variety things. And though I think stand up is maybe the thing I'm best at. It could be story. I don't know. Or it could be the character stuff I do that can pay a lot of bills. Who knows? But I think for me, I'm looking for comedy. And I don't even know if it's comedy, but this kind of creative force and stand up as a tool for that. But there's definitely being in different type of environments, being the only comedian on a storytelling show, I think gives me insight and some skills that I can bring back, and stuff. We all develop different tools. If you are just doing one thing and only in one environment and not giving yourself a chance to kind of grow, then it's going to hurt you, right? Unless that's all you want to be.
It's subjective versus objective.
Yeah.
Like if you can be subjectively funny to one room weekly, that's great. But if you can't work across multiple rooms and multiple socioeconomic groups, and like, that's the thing that I don't understand is there's a lot of like talking about, we want to support these groups and be around these groups and stuff. But when it comes to actually like going and being in those places, there's people like, there's not a lot of white comics that go down to Tacoma, like to Nate's club. Yeah. And it's like his doors are open. Yeah. And the same thing is like, I mean, I'm trying to encourage everybody that's down there to come up our way too. It's like, we're all comics. Like and it's also like, there's a weird bravado in this space. Yeah. And I don't really ever understand it because it's like, it's basically theater. Like it's not like it's a performance art. Like I don't understand the macho, like aggro.
Well, that's what we were sold. We grew up, especially like the 90s, it's all about kind of, we're
action figures.
We're talking to the everyman, this is comedy for the everyman. So when I started featuring, actually, I had, but when I got married, and I was in this relationship, a lot of my jokes shifted to me talking about my marriage, but in a positive way. And I remember I was opening for some road hack. A few people I think it was, but they're all dead now. So I'm not gonna shit on these corpses. But guy pulls me aside and he's like, "Hey, you need to stop doing that wife shit." And I'm like, why? And it's like, these guys are here to drink and feel about, and they want to see somebody they can identify with. And so when you're talking about how great your wife is, no, they want to hear about how your wife is a bitch so they can think about their bitch wives, right?
Yeah, I think I read that in one of your interviews.
So. Yeah. And I was like, well, no, and people would come up after me. And I mean, I was in the aughts. I was one of Seattle's premier feminist comedians just by not being mean to women on stage. The standards are much higher now. And in fact, I think about some of the material I do there is a little reductive because it's like, men are like this, women are like this. Right. And so I've had to really kind of expand that. But I think that there was a shift from comedy to be like, comedy is about the everyman, you will go up there, you have to be a proxy for everybody. And then alt comedy came along and people were breaking all the rules and doing weird stuff and doing characters and bringing props on stage or just doing all this kind of anti-comedy riff only sets, doing things that like, were somehow very like theatrical and intentional, but also like felt pure, right? Yeah. Like, and it's always been about finding the truth. We're truth tellers, right? But which I think maybe, I mean, the most truthful thing I do on stage is talk about how farts are beautiful. They were the first music, but that is important, right? But not this. But anyway, people need to know. But it
evolves so fast. So like this technology, the internet, changed how it.
Well, it also changed the
everyman
demographic.
concept.
Yeah.
Except like there wasn't comedy being produced for other groups of people besides, like that was what, because the special that came out, the 30 minutes, was the comedy you were going to see. And like Nick Swardson or whoever it was, like
some studio fucks.
That was marketable, that could be sold and put on the road and all that.
Somebody said that the only people who were going to comedy were dudes from 25 to 45, and that's who Comedy Central marketed for, and that was what the market was, and someone believed it, and so that's all they were doing. When in fact, when the things got opened up, you were like, oh, everybody likes comedy, right? But they just want to see stuff they can enjoy for, and I think it's a shift to people. For me, perfect comedy or even art is kind of, and Bent Washburn, who's an amazing comedian, who's from Utah. He's ex-Mormon. He's fantastic. If you ever get a chance to see him, but he said that a perfect joke or good art is equal parts unique and universal, right? So you see something or experience something, you're like, oh, I've never heard that before, but that's exactly how I feel, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think people want to hear now, I think a lot of it is people telling their unique stories that other people can find their stories in, right? And I think there's a lot of that. People want to know who the humor is up there. And there's also just like, sometimes a joke is just good, like puns and wordplay. And
I heard one of those last night.
There's just some real beautiful stuff. One of the things that kind of appeals, why I find you appealing, and honestly, when you went up, I'm like, oh, here we go again. But then there's just this beautiful, first of all, you tell jokes, where I was inclined to not like you, but I laughed at your jokes anyway, right? Mm-hmm. You just look like the dudes who used to beat me up, mm-hmm. Right? So, if I smell sports on you, I'm like, don't like this guy. But then, you have with the fact that you started drinking at 10 and your addiction, your life experience, I think you processing your life, and the way you do that in kind of a unique way is cool and interesting. Like you have your own story that is very relatable. And that's kind of what I think people are looking at now. And I think what's cool is like, because of the internet, because it's not just 5 studio execs and 3 channels and all of that shit, right? The fact that like, if there's venues that won't book you, there's an unlimited one called the internet. Mm-hmm. The fact that there's so many cool voices out there, and it's really interesting. And
getting to do this, like, I started podcasting basically when I started stand-up. And I would not listen to some of those older episodes, like as a listener. And I mean, I know I'm going to feel that same way a year from now or whatever, but the shit I've learned by talking to people like you, and like, there are these common threads across all of these interviews.
You have to fail, right? Mm-hmm. You have to. And I teach comedy because I'm a monster. It is a scam. I don't think you can teach comedy. I think you kind of have to find it. Mm-hmm. Maybe I can offer like some editors and some things, but the first thing I say, probably the first important thing in comedy classes is this is a scam. You've been ripped off. Mm-hmm. And the second one is like, you need to learn how to fail. Like this isn't, and so I have this motto that I came up with, which is eat poop, shit gold, So you go up there, and some of my best sets, you've seen me bomb, right?
Yeah.
You were supposed to say no. But
well, I mean, there was one set like we did. It was back to back. This is one of the great things about stand up is I saw you destroy, and then the next set you were like, I'm done with this. Like it was like it was an awful room, and like you just were not interested in that.
I think I learned more from that second set.
That's the truth.
And as far as like the thing I was working on that night, I think that I got more on those jokes from that shit.
I got a theory about that.
Yeah.
I think that there's only so far that you can take an idea or joke on paper.
Yeah.
And especially stuff that's more emotive or like is hard to articulate. Yeah. It's more of a feeling. Like you need to have the pressure of the failure in order to get to that place. Like it's like a booster to get you to where you can.
You have to test it, right? Like when you're designing a bridge, you want to, you can't just be like, oh, everybody walk across this. Like you have to really make
it's
sure.
Scary when the people that build those bridges in comedy and don't test their shit
or don't listen to the data or do all that.
It's crazy.
There's a lot of ways to do it, but also I think comedy is a conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that conversation is us putting out the ideas and the audience emotionally reacting to it. It can be laughter. It can be more nuanced than that. It could be like they're listening in the right places, or I love like getting an intentional groan or gasp to lead up for a bigger thing. Like there's such a different ways to do that.
Like boxing too, where like these terms like set up and punch and all that shit. Like sometimes in order to get to this place over here, you need to go 1, 2, 3 to where they're on their back foot. And then you can do that move. You wouldn't be able to normally do that move.
But without somebody to spar with, you're not going to learn how to do that. Also, you can't control what the person you're in the ring with do, right?
No.
You can just learn, but you can kind of control it, right? And
you can control yourself.
Well, you can control yourself and guide the movement. If you're good enough, you can be the one who.
I had one of those last night.
Yeah,
fuck it. Like this girl in the front row was hammered, and she was trying to give me tequila shots on the stage, and like it was one of those things where I was like, I had my material I wanted to go to, and I just like being present wasn't at the forefront of my mind, and there was a moment where it was like, you really need to be present for this, and it was like, okay, here's another slap in the face that no matter what joke I want to tell, this is a very real environment, and
you find ways to kind of do it.
Right? Oh yeah, I found it, but it was like I've never sat on the stool before on a show. I literally sat down and had to talk to her like she was basically a kid, because she was every time I turned away and looked back, she was almost like a kid in the back of the car where you're like, what did you just put on the window?
Audiences are wild right now.
Oh yeah,
they are wild because they have been in the cage of their own loneliness for so long. They don't realize that like you can't just put mute. We're not in a Zoom meeting, right?
No.
And then just also there's just that joy of being out. I haven't seen such wild, strange, unpredictable audiences since pot was legalized in Washington State. Because then you had people who would come crossfaded to shows.
Yeah.
When I was auditioning for Last Comic Standing here, when I did the showcase down here, the audience was fucking crazy, because people had like taken gummies and stuff, but it was a real kind of just, and then people kind of figured out, right? But there was just, and I think people are figuring out their levels right now.
Yeah.
For my interactive cosmic horror Christmas show, I do Sugar Plum Gary, where I become this character where people ask questions, because he met Santa and he was the only survivor, and Santa is like an elder god, right? And he's just trying to navigate through this new truth, which is kind of a lot like me with my religious experiences, going back to that, you know, but man, and we're doing hybrid shows. And it was during that weird time, like right before Omicron, people were whispering about it. And we were still, it was at the point, like a lot of people, they hadn't been, the show wasn't available. It was only online the year before. Christmas shows, people excited to be there. It was the horniest and rowdiest audiences I'd ever seen. And like, even just like, and horny in the way that they were just like, we're going to mess around with people. And also like, even so I pour myself into these footy pajamas with Santa Claus for the feet, which I think the outfit's shrinking. I'll have to look into that, but it's definitely like, I am a chubby ex-Mormon in this thing that has bulges that shouldn't be there. And I don't know why they are, but, and there were some people that were into that. And I think
like that Santa.
Well, I think a bar, like, it's kind of like the gas station sandwich thing. Like if you haven't eaten for a while and then you go into an AM PM and there's like, oh, tuna, that looks so good. And I think we're in that gas station sandwich phase, right? And people just don't quite know how to. Just
wait till that mandate lifts on the 21st of March.
Because what has been beautiful, I think we should just check Vax cards still, because it's been weeding out like the assholes, like the Trumpers and the, conspiracy, the people who weren't really willing to like take some consideration for others around it, like all the I'm not saying
this political part of the show is I have nothing to do with this. I'm just being a good host, but this is
there we go.
I'm you're entitled to your opinion for sure. And I'm vaccinated or whatever. I just like anytime that those topics come up on the podcast, I'm like, I don't want someone who has the other point of view to not listen.
I don't want you to listen.
No, it's like at that point, just close the YouTube channel.
Well, so I'm not saying that all hecklers are anti-vaxxers, but I am saying all anti-vaxxers are hecklers. Is essentially, I'm saying that they have the same thing. And but then again, too, it's also the privilege. Like I know now if someone's at a comedy show that we share the same opinions.
Yeah,
and I'm not saying that shouldn't be that safe and easy. And it's though, I don't really hide what a liberal cuck I am. I do think that, when people see me, they're like, oh, who's this, lumberjack, who's this axe murderer, this, but then they're like, oh, yeah, look at him. He's just a
you
gentle, soft babe.
I think I fall into a similar camp with that, where people like see me and then they meet me and it's very different.
Like, oh, you're just a sweetheart.
But I got to say one thing. Just a reminder, if you are watching us on YouTube and you've enjoyed the episode so far, hit that like and subscribe button and hit the notifications bell in the top right corner so you don't miss any of our content. If you have any questions or comments for myself or for Emmett, please put them in the comment box. Doing any of those things helps us with the YouTube algorithm so new people find our show. Should we go into the story section?
Yeah. If you like this, maybe call a friend you haven't talked to for a while and be like, hey, listen to this podcast. And it's full of bullshit. I think you would love it.
Perfect. All right, here's our story time section.
It's story time. It's story time with Adam. Yeah, it's story time. It's story time with Adam and friends.
Go ahead.
Oh, now I tell a story.
Yeah.
Is there? I kind of brought a few in my head. Is there something we didn't touch on about my life that you'd like me to talk about? You kind of brought something up that I may go back to.
Go.
Should I tell you about the first time a girl touched my penis?
Sure.
I think it's a gentle story.
Yeah, no, it's The way you presented that is just so beautiful.
And I think it also goes back to what we were talking about, kind of Mormonism and sort of that. So I lived in the town of Orem, and then it's really connected to a town called Provo. Mm-hmm. Provo is where BYU is. It's also kind of the wealthier town, except for like the place across the train tracks, but it's maybe the more respectable town. And Orem is a little full of orchards and kind of transitional rural. Like our high school was one floor, right? But it still was, it's a town. A city even, but it was also, my dad was a BYU professor, but he was also the first BYU prep professor to get divorced, right? And he had to buy half of the house back, buy his ex-wife out and everything, and then had all these kids, and we were definitely one of like the poor professors. Being a professor's kid was like kind of the elite, but then except if my dad was that professor, sort of thing. He was the bearded one. He was the first one to get divorced. We lived in a house that smelled like boys and books and cats, and it was just, and it was this weirdo. But one day and you'd find other weirdos, and my friend Jason Reynolds, he lived in this house that used to be connected to farmland, right? And his family over the generations slowly sold that out to the mall. And so he had a house that was in the middle of the mall parking lot, and we would all hang out there, and the weirdos. And because I was really kind of a gentle, sober kid, while my friends were smoking pot in the bushes of Jason Reynolds' house, I would sometimes sit on this wall and just think and be a weird teenager. And one day, this carload of Provo girls shows up, and they're like, "Hey!" And I had this thing. I wore kind of like a uniform of, I would wear like a white t-shirt and then like ripped jeans, right? Mm-hmm. And then I had like a weirdo haircut, right? And they were like, "Hey, do you want to come to the mall with us?" And it was a bunch of kind of well-to-do girls who were like, "Who's this bad boy?" Right?
Yeah.
And we went to the mall, and kind of hung out, did things, and one of the girls end up inviting me to this New Year's dance, and it kind of a friendship with these Provo girls happened, and I started dating one of them, and they were kind of the weird girls who lived in nice houses and just definitely didn't fit in, right? And it was kind of a beautiful sort of expansion, a union of two misfit cultures, right? Should I say her name? Let's call her Anne. That's not her name, but that's close enough. But so Anne lived in this neighborhood of houses that was kind of nestled against the mountains. Utah is essentially, most of the population lives in the valleys near the mountains where the water is. So I grew up in this suburban town with access to beautiful canyons and stuff. And her house was, I had to walk through an area called the River Bottoms, where that was exactly what it is, kind of wooded area full with the Provo River was there. And it was an interesting walk, and there were like abandoned houses there and raccoons and hobos, and it was fun. It doesn't exist anymore. Donny Osmond has a house there. It's all gone. But and so I would walk to Anne's house some days, right? A lot of days. From my house, I would walk the 2 miles uphill to her house, 2 or 3 miles. And then we would go hang out and watch movies, and we got really, and we were watching the movie Dark Crystal. Do you know Dark Crystal, the Jim Henson puppet movie? It's all set. It's beautiful. It's a whole. There's these kind of elf creatures called gelflings, and I had mentioned that Anne looked like a gelfling, and she was just this beautiful, weird girl, and we would go and we would watch the Dark Crystal and like make out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one day, it was during Thanksgiving break. Her whole family was out of the house, and I had walked, and we were at our house, and we're on the couch, and we are making out, and she's like crawling on top of me, and we're at the point where we're feeling things, right? And we're 16 and just, and it's getting, and my hands are like, I think still the sexiest part of the female body is the rib cage, right? Because there's an echo of boob there, right? And it just is like, there's just a tingle. I just remember just my palms tingling from like, wow, you could start to just like feel like there's also the promise of whiting. It's just, it's crazy, right? And then she's there, and we're obviously, we're doing that, dry humping that Levi, there's like that sort of painful friction, and we're doing what we can, and I think we have like gotten the most out of everything we were doing at the time. Like you couldn't get any, and it was just electric teen Mormon horniness was happening. So she looks at me, and she puts her hands like on my belly, right? And it's just like, and touches the top of my belt. She's and she looks at me, and I look at her, and we know that like this is not something you're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. She is like, and we kind of, and look, nod and eyes widen and kind of give her the go ahead. And she takes her one finger and just, and I would say this is the most erection I have had. I'm not saying necessarily in size, but in density, right? It was, because this is one of those moments. Like, this is the most sex moment in my life at this point.
Yeah.
Right? And so she puts just a finger, and it's down there, and just touches the tip of my penis with one finger, like ET's it, right?
Yeah.
And
E.T.
Immediately she looks at me with like a, oh no, what have I done? And all of the Mormon guilt flushes into her, and I can feel it kind of flush in me. And she jumps off the couch and goes into the kitchen and vomits in the sink.
Oh my God.
Like stress vomits. And I mentioned it was the day before Thanksgiving. And so in the sink.
And you're circumcised, right?
Yes. I'm glad we brought that up. Yeah. So my pendulous mushroom tip. I don't even know if that's appropriate, but yeah. But so it was the day before Thanksgiving. So what was in the sink was the turkey was thawing.
Oh God.
So she vomits on this Thanksgiving turkey, right? And it's not like, it's just kind of just bile or whatever, it's that stress thing. And she's like, oh no. And so we spend like a long time like scrubbing that turkey, washing the turkey.
Clean the turkey?
We clean the turkey, right? Because it's like, it's not like you can't. So, and then her mom comes in and is like, oh, you two are so cute, giving the turkey a bath, right? Just because we were weird kids together. And then she's like, you gotta go, right? And so then I walk back through those woods into my shitty town, with an erection that maybe I still have today, and as I walked back, and it was because it was Thanksgiving, and because at that point the state of my family was that we didn't really celebrate Thanksgiving and stuff. And one of the things that Anne's mom said was like, hey, Emmett, what plans do you have? And she kind of knew my situation. And she's like, we'd love to have you over for Thanksgiving. And I was like, I don't know. And Anne was like, yeah, he'll come over. Right. And they both were kind of assistant. Anne was maybe a little hesitant, but she thought if she objected, her mom would know that something had happened, right? Mm-hmm. So it was a real navigate. So I go over there for Thanksgiving, and the turkey is served. And Anne gives me like a huge serving and then takes one herself, and she's like, we have to eat this. We deserve it. It was
this is our punishment.
It was our penance shame turkey. So there we go.
That is amazing. Oh my God, dude, that was super funny. Thank you for sharing that.
There we go.
Before we go, is there anything you can plug for our listeners? Just where can people find your stuff? Where can, if they want to watch some of your shows, your social media, whatever you want to share.
How much of your timeline did we get through? Your blueprint?
We got through most of it.
Okay.
I just we did it it went about exactly how I thought it was gonna go. Not untraditional, but I'm glad.
Well, I think as things are kind of waking up and the ecosystem is kind of going, as far as like where you can find me in person, like I said, hopefully Joke Tellers Union at the Clock Out Lounge will come back. I did a online storytelling series through Northwest Film Forum called Strange Storytelling that I do in partnership with North Bend Film Festival. We're talking about doing another experimental storytelling show. As far as what it will be, we don't know. And then, I have some things I can't talk about and some things I can't remember. I've started going to the Moth, if you're in Seattle, and telling stories, but then I'll be on the stages where people will have me, which always changes. And then I do my kind of experimental online Zoom show called The Magic Hat, and you really kind of all the stuff that I'm doing where you can see my puppets, something I'm excited about. I might do a puppet festival in Canada this summer,
Nice.
And stuff like that. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, but if you get my Instagram is Emmett Montgomery. The Magic Hat has an Instagram called The Magic Hat is Magic, and there's links to, you could join me every Monday, most Mondays. And with a chance, you put your name in the hat, you can do something intentional, experiment, or just watch people from all over the continent at this point. Because we have sometimes people come in from Mexico and Canada, and Utah even. So, different countries, and participate in that. I mean, I'm out there. But Instagram is a good way to find me, and that's just Emmett Montgomery. So,
sounds good. Thanks for coming on, buddy. And thanks again, everybody, for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to rate and review us. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit the notifications bell so you don't miss our upcoming content, that like button, and subscribe. And as always, follow us on Instagram at FNFPod. We're going to leave you with Jaga.
I just make the ways, I don't write them. I can hear the lyrics in my spirit as I write them. Why you wanna walk and talk just like them? I can't get caught up in all the hype and the excitement. I just make the ways, I don't write them. I can hear the lyrics in my spirit as I write them. Why you wanna walk and talk just like them? I can't get caught up in all the hype and the excitement. My wave pool, my wave pool. Welcome to 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 my wave pool.